I was flat on my back in the wet November grass when I thought about the garage door. Not the pain. Not the crack I'd heard somewhere in my left side when I hit the ground. The garage door, whether I'd remembered to close it before I climbed the ladder. That's the kind of man I am. 69 years old, still doing my own maintenance on a house that cost me 31 years of early mornings, and the first thing my brain produces when my body gives out is a checklist item. The second thing I thought was, call Denise, my daughter. She lives 11 minutes from my house in Decatur. I'd clocked that distance years ago when my wife was sick and Denise was doing grocery runs between my house and hers. 11 minutes. That felt like safety. That felt like enough. I was wrong about that. But let me back up. My wife Carol passed 5 years ago. Breast cancer. The second time around it won the second fight the way the second fight usually does. We were married 41 years, which I know sounds like a long time, but it didn't feel long from the inside. It felt like a Tuesday afternoon that somehow became your whole life. Carol used to say I was a man who fixed things and forgot to feel them. She wasn't wrong. I spent 33 years as a civil engineer for the city of Atlanta bridges, drainage systems, load calculations. I understood, better than most people, how structures hold weight. I did not always apply that understanding to the structures inside my own house. Denise is our only living child. We lost a son early, a stillbirth before Denise arrived, and Carol and I put that grief away the way our generation did, folded small, placed somewhere quiet, never quite reached for again. And then Denise came, loud and certain and sharp as a tack, and we built our entire remaining emotional life around her. I've thought about whether that was a mistake. I've thought about it until the thinking stopped producing new answers, which is how you know it's time to stop. She married a man named Brandon. Brandon sells commercial real estate in Buckhead, high-end office space, mixed-use developments, properties where the square footage is measured in investments rather than rooms. He has a confident handshake and very strong opinions about bourbon, which I find exhausting, and he is the kind of man who walks into a room and immediately begins calculating what things are worth. I noticed that quality early. I told myself it was professional. I told myself a lot of comfortable things for a long time. In the last 3 or 4 years, I could see the cracks forming. Brandon's market had shifted. There were mentions of refinancing, of quarters that hadn't gone as planned. Denise started calling more, which I initially took as a good sign. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand the pattern. The calls always curved toward money eventually, the way water finds a drain. I helped when I could, because that's what fathers do, and because the alternative was admitting what the pattern meant. A few thousand for an emergency. A loan, I told myself, wasn't really a loan. Tuition contributions for my grandchildren's college funds. I never kept a formal record because that would have made it real. Carol would have kept a record. Carol had clear eyes, but Carol was gone. Then November came and I fell off the ladder. The paramedics were young and professional, and one of them had a Georgia Tech sticker on his water bottle, which I noticed because I am a man who notices small things even when large things are happening. They told me I had a fractured pelvis and 2 broken ribs, and that I was fortunate nothing had hit my head on the way down. I did not feel fortunate. I felt like a man who had been too stubborn to call a service company to clean a gutter. They took me to Emory Midtown. The ER was controlled chaos, the way ERs always are, and during all of it, the imaging, the intake questions, the form that asked for next of kin, I kept expecting to look up and see Denise walking through the curtain. She didn't come. My neighbor Marcus did. Marcus is 72. He has type 2 diabetes and a bad back, and absolutely no reason to be sitting in a hospital waiting room on a Wednesday afternoon. But he was there within an hour of my fall, having apparently watched the ambulance from his front porch and driven himself straight to Emory without me asking. He found me in a bay off the main ER hallway and sat in the plastic chair beside me for 4 hours. He'd stopped at a vending machine on the way in and had a bag of barbecue pita chips, which he set on the tray table next to me without comment, like it was the most natural thing in the world to bring chips to a man with broken ribs. Denise sent a text. Heard you had a fall. So sorry, crazy week over here. Planning to come see you very soon. Love you, Dad. I read it twice. I read it a third time because I was certain I was misunderstanding the words. Very soon. I had a fractured pelvis, and my daughter was 11 minutes away, and she was planning to come very soon. Marcus watched me looking at my phone. He didn't say anything. He slid the pita chips 2 inches closer to me. I'm not sure I've ever been more grateful for a wordless gesture in my life. Honestly, and I want to be honest with you throughout this, because that's the only point of telling it when I read that text, my first instinct was to make excuses for her, to tell myself she was overwhelmed, to tell myself she didn't know how serious it was. And I almost convinced myself. That instinct, to protect someone you love from the implications of their own behavior, is one of the strongest forces I know. I've been running that instinct for years. She came on day 4. By then I'd had surgery, a partial pelvic reconstruction, which the surgeon, a compact, serious woman named Dr. Owusu, explained in detail. I mostly absorbed through a pharmaceutical haze. I was sleeping 14 hours a day. The nurses on the 3rd floor knew my name and my coffee order. There was one nurse in particular, a woman named Josephine, who had a manner that reminded me so much of Carol that I had to blink the first few times she came in the room. She didn't flutter. She didn't perform warmth. She came in, did what needed doing, asked direct questions about what I was feeling, and left. But she always knocked first, always made eye contact, and on the harder days she would pull a chair close to the bed, not the chair by the window, the closed one, and just sit for a few minutes without filling the silence with anything unnecessary. "Joe," I called her. She didn't correct me. Denise arrived on day 4, around noon, dressed in the put-together way she always is, carrying a small succulent in a clay pot that I'm fairly certain came from the gift shop downstairs. She kissed my forehead. She looked around the room the way people do when they're cataloging a space they haven't been in. She sat in the chair by the window. Not Joe's chair. The far one. "You look better than I was picturing," she said. "Based on what picture?" I asked. "You haven't been here." She had the grace to look uncomfortable. She said it had been a complicated week. She mentioned the kids' schedules. She mentioned a deal of Brandon's that was in a delicate phase. I listened. I nodded. I did not say the thing I was thinking, which was, "I have been lying in this bed for 4 days and you were 11 minutes away." Instead, I asked about the grandchildren. She relaxed when the subject changed. She talked about my grandson Theo's basketball and my granddaughter Maya's PSAT scores, safe subjects, warm subjects. Then she shifted her handbag to her lap and cleared her throat, and I recognized that sound. She'd had it since she was 16. It meant she was about to ask for something. "Dad," she said, "while you're here recovering and you're going to be here a while, and then probably some kind of rehab, Brandon and I have been thinking that this might actually be a good moment to talk about the house." I looked at her. Just looked. "The Decatur house is a lot of property for one person," she continued, "especially now. And the market in that neighborhood right now is genuinely strong. If you sold, you could move into something much more manageable, a condo, or there's a really lovely continuing care community out near Stone Mountain that we looked at." "You looked at it," I said. She hesitated. "Brandon drove out there a few weeks ago. Just to see. A few weeks ago. Before the fall. Before the surgery. Before I'd spent 4 days in this bed waiting. They had already been planning this. I held that knowledge very still in my mind, the way you hold a structural calculation you don't want to be right. "Denise," I said, and my voice was quiet. I had 33 years of practice keeping my voice quiet in moments when the ground was shifting. "I fell off a ladder 4 days ago." "I know, Dad. You weren't here. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty." "I know you're not," I said. "I'm not trying to make you feel guilty either. I'm just saying it out loud because I think it should be said out loud." She stayed another 45 minutes. She talked. I listened. When she left, she carried the succulent with her, I think purely by habit, just gathering whatever she'd brought in, and I watched the door close behind her and felt something move in my chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs. Joe came in about an hour later. She looked at me for a moment, pulled the close chair to the bedside, and sat. "Hard visit," she said. It wasn't a question. "My daughter wants to sell my house." Joe nodded slowly. The nod of someone who has heard a great many things in hospital rooms and long ago made peace with all of them. "She came on day 4, I said. Joe nodded again. "Her mother," I said, "would have been here before the ambulance left the neighborhood." And then to my own genuine embarrassment, because I am not a man who cries in front of people, I started to cry. Not loudly. It was more like something I'd been holding perfectly still for a very long time finally got too heavy for my arms. Joe handed me a tissue and sat there without moving or speaking until it passed. She had the particular gift of making silence feel like company rather than absence. "You know what I've learned in this job," she said finally, "is that you find out who somebody is by who shows up. And who doesn't. And who doesn't," she agreed. I had 2 weeks in the hospital and then 3 weeks in a rehabilitation facility in Druid Hills, a good one, clean and professionally run, with a physical therapy gym that smelled like rubber mats and honest effort. I had a lot of time I hadn't asked for. I lay in my bed and I thought about things I'd been carefully not examining for several years. The loans, the pattern of calls, the way Denise's visits had grown shorter while her requests had grown larger. The way I had told myself each time that this was just a season, that things would stabilize, that what I was doing was helping. I thought about my estate. The house on Sycamore Lane, I'd bought it in 1989 and made the last mortgage payment in 2011, the same year Carol and I celebrated with grocery store champagne on the kitchen floor at midnight. There was a retirement account, an investment portfolio, the accumulated careful savings of a man who had lived within his means for 33 years. No fortune. Enough. More than enough for one person living quietly in a paid-off house. I had a will, written in the fog of Carol's death, in which Denise was sole beneficiary and executor. It had made sense at the time. It made different sense now. I also thought about Brandon. Brandon, who sold commercial real estate for a living and therefore had an instinctive and professional understanding of what a paid-off 3-bedroom on a corner lot in Decatur was worth in the current market. Brandon, who had driven past a continuing care facility near Stone Mountain before I had ever touched a ladder. Brandon, who had a firm handshake and an underwater mortgage and a wife who had not come to the hospital for 4 days. I made a phone call. My attorney's name is Theodore Marsh. He's been my attorney for 22 years, since before Carol got sick the first time, and he is a man who listens more than he talks, which I consider one of the finest qualities a person can have. I called him from the rehab facility with the door closed and the TV off, and explained the situation in full. Theodore listened without interrupting. Then he asked 4 precise questions. Then he said, "Let me outline some options." We talked for 2 hours. If you've ever had a moment where everything you'd been telling yourself quietly shifted, where you stopped making the comfortable interpretation and started making the true one, you know what those 2 hours felt like. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect the angry version of this story. I was clear in a way I hadn't been in years. The way a structural drawing gets clear when you finally account for all the loads correctly. Over the following weeks, while I was relearning how to walk and beating Marcus at chess over video call and talking to Jo on the days she was still my nurse, Theodore was putting things in order. The first thing we did was rewrite the will. Denise was no longer the sole beneficiary. A portion went to Morehouse College's Engineering Scholarship Fund. A portion went to the Emory Hospital Foundation, specifically designated for patient care on long-term recovery wards, the floors where people like Jo work. A portion went to Marcus, because a man who shows up with barbecue chips when you need him most deserves to be remembered in something more permanent than a thank you card. Denise remained in the will. She's my daughter. That didn't change. But she became one of several things rather than the only thing, and a professional trustee at Theodore's firm replaced her as executor. The second thing was the house. I didn't sell it. Instead, I transferred it into a charitable remainder trust. The house remains mine during my lifetime, fully mine. I can live in it, maintain it, leave the garage door up if I want. When I'm gone, it transfers to a community land trust that builds affordable housing in South Atlanta. The equity that Brandon had been calculating on his drive to Stone Mountain, gone. Not to anger, to something that will outlast my anger, that will exist long after any of us are keeping score. The third thing was the power of attorney. Denise had never asked directly, but I could feel the assumption operating beneath our conversations that when and if I became incapacitated, she would be the one making decisions. I gave that authority to Theodore and to Dr. Owusu jointly, 2 people who had earned my trust through their conduct, not through their bloodline. None of this was revenge. I need you to understand that, because the temptation when you're telling a story like this is to make it a revenge story, and that's not what it is. Revenge would have felt satisfying for a week and then eaten me from the inside. What I did instead was organize things correctly, the way a structural plan gets corrected when you find the error, not to punish the error, but to make the thing hold weight properly. I came home to Sycamore Lane in December. Marcus came over with a pot of his wife's collard greens and helped me navigate the front steps, and we sat in my kitchen and I told him most of what I've just told you. He listened the way good people listen, no rushing towards solutions, no reassurances, just letting the words exist in the room. "What are you going to tell Denise?" he asked. "The truth," I said. "When the time comes." The time came 3 weeks later. Denise called to say she and Brandon wanted to come for dinner, which was unusual. She rarely suggested things that involved my kitchen. I said yes. I made roast chicken and a salad and put on coffee, set the table the way Carol had always set it for company, linen napkins folded twice. They arrived together. Brandon shook my hand. He accepted coffee. He was gracious in the way men are gracious when they've prepared. Within 20 minutes, he steered the conversation to where I'd known it was going. He had clearly organized his thoughts into something resembling a presentation, the practicalities of maintaining a large property alone, the risk profile of another fall, the financial logic of liquidating real estate in a high-demand market, the flexibility a smaller residence would offer. He made it sound almost like generosity, as if guiding me towards selling my home was something he was doing for me. He finished. I refilled everyone's coffee, slowly. Then I said, "The house is in a trust." Brandon's face did something I've rarely seen faces do. It went through 3 expressions in about 1 second: surprise and calculation, and something closer to actual feeling, in that order. "It was transferred about 6 weeks ago," I said. "Theodore handled everything. After I die, it goes to a community land trust." I let that sit. I also rewrote the will, and changed the power of attorney. "Theodore can walk you through the details if you have questions." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside on Sycamore Lane, someone was walking a dog. Denise looked at me. Her face had gone pale, and then something beneath the pale looked at me. Something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not grief exactly. Something closer to being seen in a way you weren't expecting and weren't ready for. "Dad," she said. Why didn't you?" "I was in the hospital for 4 days," I said. My voice was even. "You came on day 4. I was going to come sooner." "I know," I said. "I'm not saying it to punish you. I'm saying it because it changed something for me. It showed me something I'd been not looking at for a long time." Brandon stood up, said something about needing to check on parking. I didn't mind. This conversation had never been for Brandon. I watched him go and then looked at Denise. "I know you love me," I said. "I've never doubted that. But there's a difference between love as a feeling and love as a choice. The choice is what you make when showing up costs you something. When there's nothing to gain. When someone just needs another person in the room." I thought of Joe pulling the close chair to the bedside. I thought of Marcus and the chips. Some people in my life have made that choice. I organized things to reflect that. She started to cry. I gave her a linen napkin. "We're not a tissue family." "I didn't know it had gotten that bad," she said. "Between me and you, I thought you've always been so capable. You've always been fine." "I fell off a ladder," I said. "I know. I wasn't fine." She looked at me across the kitchen table where she'd done homework as a teenager, where Carol had taught her to make biscuits, where we'd had every important conversation this family had ever managed to have. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. "I'm genuinely sorry." There it was, the thing I hadn't let myself need. I sat with it for a moment before I answered. "Because that's what it deserved. I'm not trying to cut you out of my life," I said. "You're my daughter. That doesn't change. But I'm 69 years old, and I may have another 20 years ahead of me if I'm careful and a little lucky, and I need those years to mean something. I need the people around me to be there because they want to be, not because of what they're expecting." She stayed another hour after Brandon left. We talked about Theo's basketball. We talked about Carol. She told me a story about a trip she'd taken her sophomore year of college, something that had happened in Costa Rica that she'd never told me the full version of, which turned out to be funny in a way neither of us had expected to laugh at that evening. We laughed anyway, awkwardly at first, then more easily, the way laughter works when it's real. When she left, she hugged me at the door. Not the shoulder-to-shoulder acknowledgement we'd been performing for years. A real hug, the kind where you can tell the person is actually holding on to something. "I'll come Thursday," she said. "I'll make the chicken again," I said. "Your mother's version. I want to be honest with you about how this ends, because I think the honest version is more useful than the tidy one." Denise did come Thursday. And the Thursday after that. Things between us are different now. Not fixed, that's not the right word, because fixing implies returning to a previous state, and I don't think what we're building is a return to anything. It's something newer and smaller and, I think, more solid. She knows I see her clearly, and something about being seen clearly, even when it's uncomfortable, seems to have made her more willing to actually show up, not for the house, not for anything, just to show up. Brandon is a separate matter. I don't know where that marriage is going. That's not my problem to solve. I go to physical therapy twice a week at a clinic on Scott Boulevard. I walk with a cane. I hated it at first. It felt like an admission, and then I thought about it the way I think about structural supports, which is to say that a cane is not a failure. It is the correct load-bearing solution for the current conditions. I've made my peace with it. Marcus and I play chess on Thursday evenings when Denise isn't coming for dinner. Joe moved to the cardiac care floor at Emory but sends me a message every few weeks, and I make a donation to the hospital foundation in her name every time she does. The house on Sycamore Lane is mine. The gutters need cleaning. This fall, I'm hiring someone to do it. There are lessons you only need to learn once. Carol used to say that the hardest thing about being a parent is staying a whole person while you're doing it. Not dissolving yourself so completely into the role that when your children are grown, there's nothing left of you outside of what they need you to be. I thought I understood what she meant when she said it. I don't think I truly understood it until I was lying in wet November grass thinking about a garage door, and then lying in a hospital bed for 4 days thinking about who was going to walk through the door, and then lying in a rehabilitation facility thinking about who already had. The people who showed up when there was nothing in it for them, those are the people who showed me who I actually was to someone. Not my title, not my house, not my estate. Me. I found out I had fewer of those people than I'd assumed and more than I'd feared. And I organized my life accordingly. If you're watching this and you have a parent you've been meaning to call them today. Not to ask for anything, just to call. If you're watching this and you are the parent, the one who's been making excuses for people who keep choosing other things, I want you to hear this. Seeing clearly is not the same as being cruel. Adjusting your expectations to match the evidence is not giving up on someone. It is, in fact, the most honest form of love you can practice. The question I've been sitting with since November is this. When the people in your life are hurt and need someone in the room, are you 11 minutes away and still not there? Or are you Marcus with the chips? Which one are you? It's worth knowing the answer before you need to be tested. Drop a comment with 1, 2, or 3. 1, if you think I was too hard on Denise. 2, if you think I handled it the right way. 3, if you've been in a version of this situation yourself, either side of it. I read every single one of those comments and I want to know what this brings up for you. And tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. There's something I love about knowing this story found people in different corners of the world at different hours. If this story moved you, if it said something you needed to hear or reminded you of something you needed to remember, please subscribe. There are more stories here told the same way, without flinching, without the comfortable version, real ones. I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.